Some of this will be review for what you heard already. I hope you're starting to, it sinks into you, you're getting the most important points, right? And then we're going over, a little slight degree of redundancy, but it gives me an opportunity to go into more detail about the individual foods that we're utilizing in this dietary portfolio, and to go through all the G-bombs one by one to describe their features and what they do in a little more detail, and to go over a little more general concepts about this concept that all these individual factors that protect against cancer, when added up together in a dietary portfolio that includes all of them, they work synergistically to essentially make your body cancer-proof. And sure, if you ate that way since birth, we'd wipe out almost all cancers, but even if you start this halfway in life, through life, the body's ability to repair the broken DNA crosslinks, the methylation defects, and remove toxins and cancer-causing agents from within the body is so powerful that unless you've caused extensive cell damage that have already primed the cell for cancer already, in other words, unless there's cancer already that started to replicate or get the cells becoming, at that point of advanced damage, most cases of precancerous conditions and even early cancers should be considered reversible conditions. And we have these new tests breaking through into the forefront of medical technology, where we're going to be able to detect cancers like breast cancer 10 or 15 years before mammograms can detect them through a blood test. That's going to happen in the next 5 years, and some of those tests are coming out in the next year or two. And then you're going to find out that almost all women have breast cancer when they come out, and they're going to all be panicking and not know what to do. So they all cut off their breasts. All of the women should be cutting off their breasts before they get breast cancer, because it's going to show cancer at early stages. And I'm saying that even cancers detected by mammogram, even a large numbers of those in the advanced stages are reversible. There's still a lot of DCIS and other types of lobular carcinomas and other types of cancers that haven't yet metastasized, still could be reversed if they haven't coalesced to too large of a mass, or if you take the primary mass, the individual cells that are scattered throughout the breast tissue can be resolved. But the point I'm making is, even when you have cancerous cells in the body, it doesn't always go to progress to a cancer that kills you. Some of those cells stay in a cancerous state without metastasizing, and some reverse and become normal again. And there's a very gray area between normal, an in-between stage between a non-cancerous or a precancerous stage and frankly, a definitive cancerous stage. And there's that middle gray area where it's very hard to know whether the cell, looking at the cell, taking up the dyes, the way we're looking at that cell, we can't really tell if it's cancerous or not. And in many cases, the medical profession is just diagnosing you with cancer when they can't be sure if it is cancer or not. They err on the side of being cautious and overdiagnosing cancer. So when you get a diagnosis from a pathologist saying you have cancer, you may not still have cancer. But they're not even telling you that you're in the gray area and the decision was somewhat difficult. They're just saying it's cancer. And I'm saying that in most of these cases, unless it's definitely large and spread throughout the whole body, in most of these cases, it's reversible. So for example, a man with prostate with a high growing PSA, he gets a prostate biopsy and it looks like it's clean, but the PSA velocity is such that his PSA keeps increasing from every 3 to 4 months. So it's suspicious for cancer, but the biopsy did not pick it up. So they biopsy him again, and they biopsy him again, and they keep looking for cancer. That's not the right, I'm saying that's not the way that I would recommend people do things. Because if the PSA velocity is increasing and the biopsy is negative, assume that it's most likely prostate cancer. You don't need a biopsy to prove it's cancer. And you didn't need the biopsy to begin with in the first place. But it doesn't matter, because he has no frank tumor visible through ultrasounds or through MRIs. There's no visible tumor there. He just has microscopic start of cancer, and that's extremely sensitive to reversal. So we'll just assume it. And so in other words, The medical profession wants to diagnose it so they can cut it out, radiate it, or chemo, or do something to it. And I'm saying it becomes less important as to ascertain the accuracy of the diagnosis. Because any suspicion of cancer, it should be get a person on a cancer reversal program, which the Nutritarian diet is the ultimate of all cancer reversal diets, looking at every cancer potential reversing substance and putting it together in a dietary portfolio. And you see a dramatic and predictable effect at reversal of early stage cancers and precancerous conditions. So that men that have come to me over the last 3 decades with PSAs that were climbing without even knowing whether they had cancer or not, the PSAs come back to normal and eventually start dropping and get low again. It resolves. And even when we have a diagnosis of prostate cancer with a positive biopsy, it still generally resolves. And Dean Ornish also did a study on that, showing that prostate cancer was predictably reversible early-stage prostate cancer with dietary intervention. So moving on to the beginning of this lecture, I'm showing that slide. I think I might have showed you once before, that before 1970, there were still populations around the world were eating a large amount of their dietary intake from produce. And in proportion that produce went up as a portion of total calories, cancer rates and heart attack rates went down. We know that vegetables and colorful plant foods are most protective, especially, obviously, compared to animal products. There's no study ever been done in the history of nutritional science where giving people more animal products in their diet reduced cardiovascular death or reduced cancer death. It's always the case that it's giving people more plant products and reducing animal products that creates longer lifespan and less death. Cancer was not always prevalent in the history of the human species. Cancer first started to be noticed in around 1700. I said earlier, scrotal cancer was found in chimney sweeps. Nasal cancer was found in snuff users in 1761. Hodgkin's disease was first noted in anybody in 1832. And breast cancer and prostate cancer and colon cancer were almost unheard of back then because it wasn't many people who could have access to the type of dietary stupidity that we see in the present world, because they couldn't afford that much animal products. They weren't that available. And most people had little gardens and raised food that they could get by on, and they didn't eat as much food, and there were no overweight, obese people. And food was scarce, and they lived on a lot of food that they could store or grow locally. And of course, as the Industrial Revolution, and farming and storing food and then they making more grains and baked goods and things like that started to increase. Then there started to be more visible aspects of cancer, and people ate more and more animal products. Animal products as a portion of total dietary intake was very low in most of human history. It wasn't nothing. People weren't following vegan diets, but they were following diets that were animal product consumption was relatively low compared to plant food. Even oil consumption and sugar consumption was relatively low even 100 years ago. Sugar consumption has gone up tremendously, and oil consumption probably gone up in certain oils 1,000-fold, but overall total amount of oil in the diet went up by about 100-fold. Cancer mortality in modern countries started to peak after 1920, particularly after World War I, when processed foods were starting to be developed. They made Spam and Tang and Twinkies and Ringdings or whatever. They started to make food for the U.S. government, started to support the development of processed foods, so soldiers could take processed foods and carry it with them in their backpacks to be fed and not to have access to food during wartime. And then after the wars, and especially after World War II, those foods became more part of normal American diet. And you can see 1940, 1945, after World War II, is when the fast food and processed food movement really took off, and cancer rates really took off at that point too, as more processed foods were incorporated, and you had now cold cereals like cornflakes, and puffed rice and foods shot out of cannons and made by little elves. Was that green elves? Green leprechauns? And of course, what I'm saying is, if we look at the development of autoimmune disease, like psoriasis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and ulcerative colitis, and mixed connective tissue disease, autoimmune disease paralleled the growth of autoimmune disease, and autism paralleled the rise of cancer from 1940 to the year 2000. Breast cancer deaths in the year 2000 were still widely variant among countries around the world. It took longer to export American way of life, but of course there's about a 20 to 30 lag time between the export of American style of eating to other countries. So you don't just have processed foods go into the country, everybody gets cancer. You have to smoke. You can't just start smoking cigarettes and get lung cancer right away. You got to smoke cigarettes for 15 to 20, 30 years, and then you get cancer. You follow that? There's a lag time. So the lag time was such that we exported American dangerous way of eating to these countries that are now getting exploding rates of cancer, but the explosion happened usually after the year 2000. Because at that point, they were only spreading American way of life for 20 or 30 years, and still in Gambia, rural China, Cambodia, and Thailand, only 4 per 100,000 had breast cancer, compared to U.S. and Western Europe or England is 120 per 100,000. So we're talking about 1/50th, not 1/15th, but 1/50th to 100th the amount of breast cancer. I'm using breast cancer as an example to demonstrate that the countries with the highest amount of breast cancer around the world were predominantly the United States and Western Europe, because they had the highest consumption of animal products and dairy products, except for Argentina. Argentina, of course, in there, and some South American countries also had high intake of animal products and thus also had a high rate of cancer. Belgium, Denmark, France, Netherlands seem to have the highest rate of breast cancer, but they also have the highest rate also of cow's milk consumption. And they're doing a better job than we are now at changing that, by the way. We're seeing still a climbing of cancer rates, and they're spending more effort on educating the population to eat more fruits and vegetables and to take better care of and eat less animal products, and they're focused more on climate change and better nutrition. So right now in the Scandinavian countries, their rates of breast cancer are going down while our rates are still going up, because we're still in this country have our head buried in the marshmallows and fried chicken. Now, speaking of fried chicken, saturated fats are turn on the cells to metastasize for cancer cells to accelerate their aggressive cause of death. So cancer cells grow along slowly, hug together in a mass, and then they start to spread and throw cells to the rest of your body. And the saturated fats from meat and cheese turn on the CD6 fat controller that's a receptor in the cell wall of cells that are become cancerous. And when these cell receptors, the CD6 receptors, are stimulated by saturated fats, then the cancer cells start to grow, replicate, break off, and spread to the rest of the body very rapidly. Called like the cancer fat controller, that diets high in animal fats particularly allow cancer cells to replicate and spread through the body. Animal protein allows cancer cells to replicate, and through the raising of IGF-1 helps these tumors that start to develop get a blood supply so they can grow and spread more rapidly as well. And of course, the glycemic carbohydrates are part of the witch's cauldron of causation that raise insulin. And it's the insulin IGF-1 sandwich, the combination of insulin and IGF-1 and saturated fat, the combination of those different ingredients all together that have the most powerful effect at accelerating cancer growth. So we all maybe have abnormal cells that might be changing or might be becoming toxic, might be becoming damaged, might be going towards cancer, and all of a sudden you bathe them with some saturated fat, high IGF-1, high insulin levels, and boom, they explode, proliferate, and start to become more aggressive cancer. So what I'm saying right now is that the American diet style is the perfect diet style designed by ISIS to kill people, because it mixes together all the most powerful cancer-causing elements. You following me right now? We have, how could you get a more cancer-causing element than something like pizza, or hamburgers, or bacon, or whatever it is, even the bacon cheeseburgers, whatever it is, with the bread and then with the milkshakes, and the fried foods. It's just like unbelievable. How could people in this country be so self-destructive? to ruin, it's so, and not to care about what happens to their future until they get closer to the future. I always say, sit down and think about yourself and how the future you, 20, 30 years from now, is going to look back and judge you now when you had this opportunity to protect yourself and you damage that future you. How angry the future you is going to be at your present you if you don't take care of yourself, right? You have nobody standing up for you, fighting for you, and protecting you except for you, right? So it might be painful for some of you to move away from your addictive habits and your food eating habits, but you've spent a lot of time here this weekend and you have a lot of information. So you hopefully can put this information into action in your own lives, which is so important because then you can become a superstar, radiating out information, affecting people in your community, in your family, in your local areas, and that you come in contact with, and having a beneficial effect on them, the community, and through that, the world. And it's a part of the world, right? It's the part of the world where your fingertips end. You can't change the whole world, but you could change a small part of the world. And that's tremendously rewarding, even if you could benefit a small part of your world. And you can't benefit a small part of your world unless you walk the talk and you do it yourself and you become a role model of great health. So the foods with the strongest link to cancer, of course, the World Health Organization, considers processed meats, luncheon meats, and barbecue meats and red meats a class 1A carcinogen. Dairy products, of course, fried foods, white foods, we've gone over this already, how this works. But there's other issues here. It's that when you eat a diet that maximally promotes growth when you're young, because that's the way the American social structure, the social norms in America is, we are more favored if our children grow faster and look larger and get taller. If they can get more plump and bigger earlier on, they think it's, people can brag, oh, look at how fast they're growing. We're going to measure him at the doctor on the growth chart and see if he's getting to the top of the growth chart. Give him more food and get him higher up and get him a bigger, more plumper human. We're all focused, and it's even what we learned in elementary school was that the foods that maximize growth in a lab rat, like dairy products, were best for us because we're looking to maximize growth. We always thought incorrectly that maximizing growth was an ideal to shoot for, and we learned over the years that the animals that grow the fastest die the youngest, and the animals that mature the fastest have the most cancer. So if you want your child to be a linebacker on the high school football team and weigh 250 pounds by the time he's 16 years old, he's not going to have a very long life. And what I'm saying right now is that risks of cancer are overwhelmingly begin in childhood, and disproportionately the weight of the growth of the human in childhood, of how fast and rapidly they're growing, is overwhelmingly a major cause of cancer looking at their entire life. For example, a woman's age where she goes through puberty. The average age of women going through puberty was age 18 in 1840. My children all went through puberty between the age of 16 and 19. But the average age in America today, right, is about 12 years old, and it's actually going younger because the more we eat growth-promoting foods like dairy products, saturated fats, fast foods, and all the things we're talking about, the faster the animal grows and matures. And of course, starts to go through puberty at a younger age. And going through puberty represents more estrogen exposure, right? Higher levels of hormones. And fat on the body produces more estrogen. And more growth-promoting foods like animal products help the body produce more estrogen too. And then you go through puberty younger. What I'm saying is that when you grow a plant in an unhealthy soil, it'll go to seed and spread its seed earlier in life than die young. We're taking the change of life and the life cycle and speeding it up and condensing it into a quicker time frame. And the earlier you grow through puberty, or the earlier that your son reaches his adult height, the faster he grows, the more they mature, the earlier the beard comes in, the more the body hairs come in, and he gets the sexual staging, the Tanner staging of getting to how much fast they're maturing. We're not looking to have our children grow and mature as quick as possible. We're looking to have them mature as slowly as possible. And so certainly you're exposed now to more hormones through higher levels of hormones with higher body weight. And then they get to start using alcohol in this country. And alcohol is carcinogenic. Let me say that one more time. That there's no level of alcohol consumption that's safe. Even one glass of wine a day increases risk of breast cancer significantly by about 12 to 15%. And there's no level of alcohol consumption that isn't carcinogenic or safe. Even using alcohol in mouthwash and spitting it out increases risk of cancer to a degree. We're all just, and then obviously weight gain in childhood is bad enough, but adult weight gain continues to be a major factor for breast and prostate cancer. And low lactation duration means that not having children increases your risk of cancer, and not breastfeeding children when you do have them increases risk of cancer. And it's natural for a child to be heavily breastfed for 6 months and then breastfed, on demand or a few times a day up until 2 years of age. It's up until 2 years of age when the immune system matures enough where you don't need the immunoglobulins from the mother's body anymore. In other words, when you're a child, you have the tight junctions between the cells in your digestive tract are intentionally left open. And they don't tighten up or close, like I showed on the slide yesterday, with the tight junctions between the cells being gummed together with crazy glue. Remember I told you that? But they're intentionally left open with a baby, so the immunoglobulins from mother's breast milk don't get broken down. So the immune system is coming from the mother's breast milk, going into the bloodstream, and then as the baby matures and gets older, through 1 year, 1.5, up to 2 years, they gradually close down, so less and less immunoglobulins are going through. What I'm saying right now is the baby is utilizing the mother's immune system to offer itself protection against illness, disease, viruses, bacteria, and toxins. The immune system is being used by the mother for the growing child as their immune system develops. As their immune system develops, the gut closes up. And the human body is designed with dependency on breast milk for that entire time, the first 2 years of life. So when you take your child and taking them and feed them on formula, you're increasing the risk of later life cancer and increasing the risk of having autoimmune conditions and allergies, of course.